everybody, it's Lori from Lori Kent Designs, and I am here with Costa. Yay! Costa is my professional embroidery expert here, and he also works for Janome, so we're very lucky to have him here working for Lori Kent Designs. And today is a special video series we are starting. Today is part one, and part one is Take Me to the Beach. Take Me to the Beach is a special embroidery design that I created as a pillow. And I'm going to show it to you. It's a wonderful, wonderful design. I'm going to show it to you now, and I'm going to also talk about my inspiration behind it. So here we go. I'm just going to lift it up. I'm going to
Ta-da!
So we have. So how do we look, Costa?
You look
good
wonderful. You look wonderful.
Okay.
And we can see it all, every part of it. There is every part. It has almost, I can't even tell you how many blocks is in it. It has filler blocks, applique blocks, and just plain stitching blocks.
Yeah. So what I wanted to tell you about this beautiful pillow, and I'm just going to move it over here to the
And
side.
I'll tell you what, I can hold it for you, Lori.
Oh, okay. Let me move over here. Okay. So the inspiration for this pillow, so I grew up on spending my summers on an island off the coast of Maine. It's called Swans Island, and I spent my summers there with my grandmother, who was the island nurse, and my family, of course. And so I have a special affinity for the beach. I do lots of other types of designs, but I have a special affinity for coastal designs. And so obviously I wanted something very coastal. I wanted, of course, to have a lighthouse, and we have a beautiful lighthouse there at applique and stitching block. I grew up eating lots of lobster and lots of crab, so I had to include that in my pillow. And I have a scuba diver here, and the scuba diver is actually, I've always wanted to scuba dive. I don't have the nerve yet to do it. Maybe someday I will, but I've done snorkeling. And of course, we have the little girl with the inner tube. And the beauty of this design is you can change the skin tone and you can change your hair color depending on whatever you like. I'd like to think of this as maybe me as a little girl, only, you know, I had blonde hair, and with her little bathing suit and inner tube. And then we have a beautiful a woman here on a float. And I'd like to think that this was me, but maybe 40 years ago, I don't know. Or it's probably my daughter, who is that's probably closer to what she looks like. And of course we have Surfer Man over here, this gorgeous hunk of a guy. I love designing him with his sculpted abs and you know, his surfboard and his colorful board shorts. And we have a little glass of lemonade. Of course you can't go to the beach without something cool to drink. And we have the seagull here and the sailboat here. My daughter sails, so I had to put a sailboat in there. Of course we have seashells. My favorite thing to do is shelling at the beach. And then, of course, we have the beautiful flowers, the hibiscus flowers with the
and sandcastles.
Sandcastle. Now, I always wanted to make the perfect sandcastle. I ended up making mostly mud sand. And, of course, we have flip-flops here. And then, of course, what I did was I combined up some special beachy type fabrics. So you may have similar fabrics in your stash, or at your store may sell it to you. With some different kinds of fabrics, but this is what I did. And you can choose to make a pillow, or you can make just about any other kind of design. You can make a quilt. You can take some of these design elements and put them on a bag. Lots of things that you can do with this pillow. So if you purchase the embroidery file CD or USB, you will find on that file lots and lots of directions, because as an artist I like to keep very, very organized. And so in your USB, you'll have lots of directions. We're going to cut over here to camera 2, and we're going to show you, if you print out your directions from your USB or CD, this is what you're going to find in those files. So I'm going to cut over here to camera 2, and Costa is going to kind of flip the pages for me. So I created a diagram that has all of the blocks numbered. And when we sew it all, after you embroider it, this is putting it all together once you sew. So we're jumping ahead just a little bit here, but this is after you stitch it together. This is how you're going to sew it, because of course you're going to need to know how to do that if you're making the bench pillow.
Wonderful directions. And we have section 1, section 2, and sewing them together once we do it.
Yes,
Once we embroider it, we have them sewn together, and then in the end, she has section 7, and then it's all put together
It's all put together.
right there.
And then the other part of your directions, of course, we have directions for embroidery. And now with this video series, we're going to go over all the different steps we are going to actually do together a stitched block and an applique block and a filler block. And we're going to show you all the supplies that you're going to need. But these are some of your directions, which we will go over. And of course your supplies needed, which we are going to go over in a minute, all the supplies that you will need to make this pillow.
And this is an instruction that before you embroider these 5 particular blocks, you will have to stitch these 3 things together. And then there's some instructions on how we match them up to the line.
Okay, so the previous page that we talked about was the 3 pieces of fabric that you were going to sew together. Here on our pillow is one of those blocks, the lighthouse block. So we've got the sand at the bottom, and so that's one piece of fabric, and then we've got the dark blue for the ocean, and then we have the light blue for the sky. Now you will sew those together first, and we will show you on our series of videos how to do that, how to line it up exactly so that you get it exactly that way, and then we're going to stitch it out, right, Costa?
Exactly. And there'll be lines on your embroidery where these will line up, and we will show all that to you in one of these videos that we will be doing applique and this kind of blocks.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk to you about that's on your USB or CD is the cutting instructions. Now, if you look at the cutting instructions, your fabric may look different from ours, but the fabric, the cutting directions for your blocks, so wherever you see the ladies in sunbathing on your diagram, you will have your fabric and you will cut those, and I've shown you how to cut it.
And she's also got the block numbers, so
Yes.
you'll know exactly where they are on your diagram.
Yep.
So there's block 26, 31, and so and so. This was the cocktail, the sunglasses, the white fabric, the medium blue,
Yes.
blender, tan.
Mhm.
And so she's cut them, and then you would just cut them in those formats in the way of your strips and those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And this is what you would need. And this is your cutting Bible, as I say.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done with the intent that we don't want to be wasteful and we don't want to have fabric and then we run out of fabric because we didn't cut correctly. So if you follow these diagrams, it should help you because I've shown you how to cut it into strips and to save time.
Mm-hmm.
And to be organized. Now, here's another piece of information that's in it. Now, these are your finished sizes. Now, what I mean by finished sizes, your block finished sizes will be after it's sewn together. Now, these are approximate sizes, meaning that, say, block number 1, 3x4 finished, you may measure it after you've sewn it together, and it might be slightly off by 1/4 of an inch. It may not be, but that's okay. So these are, because the stippling is in the block, it makes everything tighter and pulled together. So the blocks may be a little bit smaller, but your cut sizes are 1 inch larger, and the finished sizes are 1 inch smaller. And
All
then
the way around.
all the
And
way around,
You,
yep.
when you sew these together, you have a line that you will be following to sew them all together as you go. And when you look at the putting it together, you will figure that out.
And now did we talk about this before, the supplies?
I'm not sure, but we'll do it again. The supply list is here, just as all the other. These are the supplies you will need. Right after we talked about, how you would give your directions for embroidery, then these are the supply lists that you will need.
Okay, so
And
now,
we're going to talk about those supplies.
yeah, so the first thing that you're going to need is you're going to be using either fabric from your stash or fabric from your local store. You're going to need a fabric kit if you're going to use your own fabric, like I said, or buy fabric from your local quilt store. This is what you're going to have, and you're going to also have your USB and your CD.
Or your CD, whichever that may be.
And
And
this,
this is the fabric that came in this particular kit.
and some of your stores may offer an optional thread kit. Now this is, I like Glide, that's what I use, but you can use any kind of thread. And so there are 20 colors in here, and we did not include black and white or the water soluble thread, but there's 20 colors in there, And that's also a great thing to do if you want your pillow to look just like the sample.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then we're going to show you the other supplies that you will need.
Lori suggested the water-soluble thread earlier, so this is a large spool of water-soluble. It does come in a smaller thread. So it does come in a smaller spool. So the white soluble thread, it's not necessarily white because it does go away with water. We use this especially when we put the base fabric on top, so that if in fact when we're sewing it together eventually we can just wash away or just use a water pen and just get rid of the thread, and that way you don't know if you're a little off when you're putting it together. So water soluble thread is very, very, very nice to use, and again, keep it in a plastic bag so the humidity does not get to it. Next thing you will need is a 60 millimeter rotary cutter. Now that 60 millimeter rotary cutter is important, not necessarily to cut fabric, because you can use anything for that, 45 or 60, but we use this with our trimmer by George. Now the trimmer by George becomes a very important thing. This is a Hoop Sisters brand. Your shop can order them, and this is a Hoop Sisters brand, and it has a ledge to it, and I don't know in my camera, there you can see that ledge. That ledge will get under your fabric and cut what's under it so that you will only not mess up with your facing, and then it takes the bulk out of what you're sewing. Okay, so we use the trimmer by George to put these blocks together very nicely. Also again, we're going to use the 404. 404, we're going to need that, especially in those 5 blocks that have the 3 fabrics. We need 4x4. This is a repositionable adhesive instead of a 505, which is more temporary. So I do like the 4x4, and it won't break your thread, and it's an easier use. Also, in between my upper or my lower or the inside hoop and the outside hoop, I like to use what I call hoop grip. Especially when you're using a no-show mesh or a sew-and wash or something that's mesh, it can easily move in intensive designs. So this keeps it really there. It's by Bare Thread Designs, and I use this all the time. So I love that in my hoops to keep that no-show mesh going. And as I said, no-show mesh is your main stabilizer. I love no-show mesh because it still keeps that, it holds about 9,000 stitches, but it does hold right. It doesn't, it's more pliable. It's not so stiff. And also, I do love Battleizer. Battleizer is another Hoop Sister brand, but whatever project batting you can find. Project batting is a batting that keeps the scrim inside and makes it so it's for intensive embroidery designs within the hoop. And that's really what you're creating when you're creating these within your hoop. Another thing I do for prepping my fabric, I use my Mr. bottle with Terial Magic. Now Terial Magic is, we're just going to cut to, and I'm going to let Lori hold the Terial Magic
So I'm
bottle.
going to be like QVC.
Yeah. So, and there's Terial Magic. And Terial Magic looks like this. This is the huge gallon. You don't need that.
Yeah.
But it does come in bottles, and you're just going to pour it. I know a lot of you embroiderers have heard of it already. And it is a fabric stabilizer, but a liquid stabilizer. I love it, and I use it sparingly on fabric, and we will show you in the video how I use it and what I use with it. So again, the reason it was such a big bottle, I use a lot of it, and we're going to put it in a Mr. bottle, and this is one of the Mr. bottles that I have, many of them. And then I also use with it, I use parchment paper. This is my favorite parchment paper. There's all kinds of parchment paper, and just use it. I spray to the back of it. I'll show you all that, and then so the iron is not touching the Terial Magic alone. So I love to use parchment paper as a way of ironing on it. Okay? And
so Kosta's going to talk to you about the different types of needles that he recommends when we stitch out this pillow. the different types of needles, and of course the bobbin.
Okay, so the bobbins, first of all, we want pre-wound bobbins. I use 70 weight. A lot of your Baby Lock and Brother machines use 90 weight. I love that too. Anything that you want to use, I use pre-wound bobbins for Lori's designs on all of them because pre-wound bobbins save a lot of stitches. So again, pre-wound bobbins, and I like less dense bobbin thread. If you could use 70, 80, or even 90 weight bobbin thread is beautiful. It works wonderful against this glide thread. Number 2, let's talk about needles.
Which is very important.
Yes.
Because some people talk about how they're designed, maybe when they're doing an applique. Some people have called on different embroidery
That's
projects, any kind of embroidery,
Exactly.
Timbervell or OESD. But when they're doing applique, their fabric seems to be pulling away from the satin stitch, and that they think there's something wrong with the satin stitch, or there's something wrong with their machine.
Or they want
Costa
it.
really knows the answer to this question. So
Now,
go ahead.
and I'm going to answer that, and I've experimented a lot because it's happened to me a million times. So so it's one of those things. Ask me how I know. And we've even had samples where I look at it later and say, "Oh my God, it's separated from the satin," and I've digitized the satin. So one of the things that I found, this is just the way I found it, use the smallest needle, meaning the smallest number. I go down even when I'm putting fabric with a satin stitch on a batted piece of fabric. It's what you're going to be doing on these blocks with a stippled, and you've got that, you've got more of stuff under it. That's when that big needle, if you're using a top stitch needle or a 90-14 needle, and that eye of the hole is tearing into that fabric. Our fabric in applique is not our cotton fabric. It could be a light weave to it, and
Yes.
that's where the problems lie. So again, I do Terrial Magic my top, whatever I'm appliquing. That's the first thing. That doesn't always clear it up though. Some people put an interfacing under it. That doesn't always clear it up. What I think can clear it up is the smallest needle you can find. So if you have a 7010 microtext, a 7511 embroidery needle, I'd say no to, because that eye of the needle's a little hot, a little open, because it's embroidery thread it's dealing with. Use the smallest needle you can use. My favorite is a 7511 or a 7010 microtext. So that tip of that needle is very sharp and it's going through there. Someone asked me, because of your when it tears like that, you just make your satin stitch wider. No, because it's still going to tear when it touches your fabric.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Plus, if you're having a curve, those of you who are digitizers know, or even appliqueurs know, that you have to have a smaller stitch when you're doing the curve of a body or the curve of anything. So again, use that smaller needle, and I think your results will be better. I'm not going to say that they'll be 100%. You may still see it torn because the cotton is cotton, but do everything you can to stop it.
Okay, so then we talked about needles, we talked about our supplies, and of course we talked about the bobbin, the thread, the fabric kit, and everything. One of the great things about this project is it helps you to be organized in any area of any kind of project. Obviously, it helps to be organized. I like to take my directions and I like to print them out, and I put them in a binder. Now, some of you guys may not want to print all of that paper. It's expensive, I get it. A lot of you have iPads or computers next to your embroidery machine. You can bring them up as you're doing your project and you can have them right there. That's a great way to do it. Highly recommend it. I put mine in a binder because that's personally how I like to do it. So when I put them in a binder, I have all my directions there. So then I'm organized. I even have tabs for the different things. We have PDF files for all of the blocks, so it shows you a picture, an actual diagram picture of each particular step. I have a file for that. So print them out. If you don't want to print them out, keep them on your computer. But the other thing is, when you're cutting all this fabric, keep it organized. Put it in Ziploc bags. Label them. You can also Material Magic your pieces of fabric and iron it ahead of time when you put them in the Ziploc
That's a
bags,
great idea.
so that you're all ready to go and you don't have to get the iron out a second or third time. But you can just do all the ironing at once.
And you could
do all the
cut
Material Magic
right.
at once.
You can cut the Material Magic to pieces.
Yes.
And once you've done your whole piece in Material Magic, don't want to do it because now it's ready to go.
Right.
And cut it.
So the magic of it is just to keep yourself organized, and it will just save you a lot of time and a lot of trouble.
Absolutely.
So this is the end of our part 1 video. Part 2 is coming up, and part 2 we are going to talk about how to get your block ready to stitch out. We're going to actually do the Material Magic, and we're going to iron it, and then we are going to get it ready in the hoop by showing you how to hoop your no-show mesh and your battleizer and your fabric, and we are going to do the lobster block. We're going to do that in part 2.
And that's block number 2.
That's block number 2. We are going to do the lobster block. We are going to complete it, and we are going to show you what it looks like and how to trim it up in the end. That's part 2. Thank you for joining me.
So if you're
1.
at home, one last minute, if you're at home and you're doing these things with us, go on home, and now that we've shown you how to cut your fabric in strips, start preparing your fabric, get your blocks ready, cut them in, and then even do your your battleizer, cut that up. Cut that up exactly as you cut your fabrics for each block and put it in your bags. And then we'll be back with you to show you one stitched out, total stitched out block, no applique. And it'll show you the progression of how we're putting our stippling and adding the fabrics.
Okay, so join us for part 2. After you finish part 1, do your homework and cut your blocks up and get them all ready so that you can go stitch with us the lobster block on part 2. Thanks everybody. We'll see you soon.